past is dead. We either move forward or we die with it.
Rings of Power released a new trailer a couple of days ago, but with it came a load of exclusive articles and interviews. This one comes courtesy of you.com. Seriously, who says the universe doesn't have a sense of humor? This was where the first pictures came from before the trailer was actually released, and it kind of hints at a change of tone for the producers. The core marketing message remains the same. It's similar to the one they used for the Wheel of Time. And I don't know why, because I'd argue it didn't work for that over there either. But the rest of it has this strange mix, which somehow manages to be simultaneously incredibly arrogant and egotistical, but also attempting a bit more honest humility, which I don't think we've seen of them before. What results is a strange article that, for an exclusive, doesn't actually come across as that complimentary. And then gets really strange when people start repeating lines from other interviews which they'd never taken part in. So either the cast absorbed these lines via osmosis by just talking to the producer, or Amazon's been just as in control of this one as they have in the rest. Because we start with something that I think's meant to be really impressive, but to me, just sounds like a complete disaster. As Yip wasn't prepared for the full scale and detail of the set, they'd essentially built an entire seaside castle from the ground up, stone by stone. It was breathtaking. Every corner you turned, there was so much storytelling. This had a level of obsessive detail, and with a reported price tag stretching well above $1 billion, it's the most expensive TV series ever made. And as much as they want to show off about that, as impressive that may sound, that's actually a disaster. Because that $1 billion already isn't what it seems. Not only does that include buying the rights to the show, but the rest of it also won't appear on the screen, as the $465 million amount almost certainly included the additional costs of the season's production budget, including startup costs of building sets, costumes and props that would be used in future seasons. And this was backed up in Empire magazine and others, with lines like, "This is a crazy headline that's fun to click on, but it's really building the infrastructure that will sustain the entire series." So of course it sounds like they're spending all of that on season 1, and it's just not true. Lots of that money was sunk into setting up the series so that it could go on into the future in a more efficient manner, which would probably have less money spent on them. Except there's a problem with that. Rings of Power isn't even in New Zealand anymore. They're coming to the UK and are going to build entirely new studios from scratch over here. And so you have to question, where's all that budget coming from? Because lots of money that was spent on season 1 now will go to waste because they're not even in that country anymore. Now they've got to build an entire new studio over here. Is that coming out of season 1 budget or season 2? And while the company plans to ship all of the sets that were built for the first season to the UK, are you gonna do that with a beachside town? Every weathered stone, every small shrine, which all amounts to an entire seaside city from the ground up, stone by stone. Is all of that going to be shipped over to the UK and then rebuilt? How expensive is that going to be, and where is it coming from? The Wheel of Time had the same issue. They gave it to Rafe Jordan, who then essentially had to build his entire business in a different country, and he did it with the money that Amazon gave him. Is it any wonder, if you're setting up your own business from scratch, that not a lot of that money seems to end up on the screen? Is that why so many TV shows with massive budgets just look cheap when they come to the screen? You wonder where all the money's gone, and it's because it's gone setting up someone's private firm. A common joke could be it seems like money laundering schemes, when honestly it could probably just be put down to paying to build somebody else's business and complete incompetence. But it goes on that Payne and McKay pondered over every tiny detail of the Rings of Power. It was one place we were laser focused on saying we need to get this right. It's never been seen before. People have ideas of what elves look like or dwarves look like and what those kingdoms look like. That's because they've read about them and know the canon. They don't have an idea, they know. There's descriptions of these things, there's descriptions of these people, and it's not the best. Because they say Numenor was, in some ways, a blank canvas. And that's a contradiction in terms. You can't say that people know what the elves and the dwarves and the kingdoms look like, and then say it's a blank canvas. You want it to be a blank canvas because you want to impose your will upon somebody else's work. That's why you chose this age, to give you that space. But the issue is, that does mean that of the bits that everyone already knows what it looks like, you have to obey it. You've got to stick to the law. And you haven't in so many ways. The elves don't look like elves. The dwarves don't look like dwarves. And many of the characters that you've taken from the books don't even look like themselves. And you could argue, well, you know, people change as they get older, and their fashion senses might change. But you know what wouldn't change? Things which are canonical, fundamental parts of the species. Because people used to seeing elves as like these proud, aristocratic, angelic-like beings. And instead for this, you've just kind of made them look like your gran. But the article keeps on taking digs when he says Tolkien describes Numenor as the greatest human civilization, but hubris and ambition rots the kingdom from the inside. In some ways, the story could be seen as a cautionary tale for the show itself. I mean, seriously, that was so savage I could have written that one myself. If Rings of Power succeeds, it could reach unprecedented heights, leading a legacy to endure for years. A lot like Peter Jackson's trilogy, which everyone associated with Rings of Power seem oh so desperate to denigrate. Oh, it turns out no one liked the Peter Jackson trilogies all along. Yeah, if you go back and watch them, they're just a bit crap. Rings of Power is where it's really amazing. Whereas if it fails, it could go down like the doomed island itself, destined to sink beneath the waves. This is a website that got an exclusive look at Rings of Power, and they're going, yeah, but you know, this could die on its ass. And I mean, with pictures like this, it's looking pretty likely. Any kind of scene that I've seen in this whole area does give me Wheel of Time vibes. All the costumes, all the sets do. Because it looks extremely cheap when you're just wearing printed clothing as armor. Now, it does have an advantage over Wheel of Time in the fact that she is at least actually wearing some real armor, and then the printing is sort of over the top. As Wheel of Time was essentially just a load of robes. It was all the cheap and none of the actual good bits. But still, for this actually to be used in your promotional images, no, you don't want to do that. Maybe on screen with moving pictures, however you were going to show the show, it wouldn't be noticeable. But on a high-resolution picture that you send out for promotion, I'd choose better ones myself. Then the article goes on, drawing a rather derogatory image when it goes that The Rings of Power isn't a direct adaptation of Tolkien's novel. This is a message which they definitely didn't want to put forwards in previous marketing. It was always, no, we're adapting his books, we're doing exactly what it was. Everyone spoke about it before, we're adopting Tolkien's lore. Not anymore, we're dropping the adaptation. Now it's simply inspired by the author's notes. Changing and messaging like that is important, because when you adapt something, it means you are beholden to that work. You are taking it and putting it on the screen. But if you're just inspired by it, I mean, basically do whatever you want. Someone could watch this video and then make a movie inspired by it where space aliens come down and start taking over the Earth. And the only thing it's inspired by is the fact that YouTube exists. That's how you get ghost stories inspired by a true story. It's not saying it's a true story. It's just, yeah, we read it once and took maybe an idea from it. And then it goes on, even insulting the writers themselves, that Payne and McKay were two unknown writers whose highest profile job was uncredited work on the Star Trek franchise. Just fills your heart with hope for the future of the series, doesn't it? Yes, the biggest profile job is just one no one wants to talk about. And they say themselves, we didn't have the resume that might make a studio head think that we were a choice for this. We went up for it basically saying, well, let's leave everything on the field and see what happens. Their plan, right from the start, in their own words, was, yeah, we don't have a plan. Yeah, let's just throw everything at it and see if we can make something good. Let's not rule anything out. Let's not restrain ourselves. We don't want to put any limits on us that might actually harm our creativity. I can't imagine getting $1 billion contract by going, those books over there, we're not actually going to be limited by those. We are willing to do anything. I know you've done no real work before, but you should probably just trust us. If that doesn't fill you with confidence, I don't know what will. Because it says, despite their inexperience, Payne and McKay were lifelong Tolkien geeks, and their pitch centered on a story they themselves had always wanted to see on the screen, The Second Age. We weren't interested in doing a prequel. We wanted to go way, way back and find a story that could exist on its own. One that hadn't been told on the level and scale of the depth it deserved. They specifically went back in time and found something that Tolkien hadn't really talked about that much. Why? Because they didn't want him to. You can't have a book with canon and lore, you know, all that pesky stuff, which you kind of just want to get rid of anyway. It's limiting. It's harming your creativity. You can be such masters that no one wants to even give you credit for the work you've done in the past. And so obviously wouldn't want to damage or blunt your creative genius by something so run-of-the-mill as, Tolkien.
This could be the beginning of a new era.
But let's not forget Rafe Jordan and Wheel of Time. He had all of that lore in the canons of the book sitting right there, and he didn't care about them. He might as well have just set fire to every book on them on Earth for all he cares about those things. He will happily destroy any character, any story, any part of those books in the canon, because if anything, it doesn't seem like he's a fan. It seems like he actively despises the work. So I don't know why Amazon didn't tell McKay this. If you thought so little of Tolkien that you didn't want to be limited by his work, you didn't want to adapt it in any way, you just wanted to make your own story, fan fiction in his universe. And he could have just phoned up Rafe Judkins and asked him what he did. And make no mistake, when they say everything's on the field, they won't be limited by any of that pesky canon. They really are serious about it, because we've got Queen Regent Muriel, like one of the characters that does exist in canon, and one they've changed. Because it's not just the elves they've ruined by making them look like grannies. Oh no, they've actually changed the aesthetic of many of the cast and the entire world itself. Art, Rings of Power, the fans, power, fans, Amazon, fans. Because the reasons for this are obvious. It's what's happened in many TV shows, and these two showrunners aren't immune to it, despite the fact that they note Tolkien never wanted his stories to directly echo real-world politics. That's clearly not something that they have a problem with themselves. Sure, they can say they feel the same way about Rings of Power, but words are cheap, and you can't just say that and then directly, through your own actions, disprove it. Because Tolkien really despised other people messing with his work. He was not a fan of fan fiction, and yet they are determined to try and say how he just wrote about wanting other minds and hands to create art in his legendarium, and then arrogantly go on to say that we feel like we're taking up the gauntlet that he put down. I mean, I'm pretty sure if someone throws down the gauntlet, they're actually challenging you to a fight. That's not exactly the best metaphor that I would have chosen for this, but it probably does accurately summarize how he'd feel if he was still alive right now to defend himself. Because one thing that's for sure is that this isn't Tolkien. These aren't the same characters that he wrote about. It's not the same events that he wrote about, as a lot of it's just being made up out of their own heads. But what is even still written down, what we know for certain, is still being changed. With elves that have biological skin protection and yet live underground so never see the sun. Costume choices that make half-foots stumble along the ground as if they're wearing flippers. Bizarre accents that seem like a mix of Irish and who knows what.
Elves have forests to protect, men their fields of grain.
And a fundamental choice at the heart of the work, which said, we don't care about Tolkien. That this isn't Tolkien's universe. That this is the universe that we want it to be, that we created, rather than him. It was this belief that you could entirely change somebody's universe that made this entire thing inspired by and not adapted. That's what made them change people playing dwarves, elves, and more. It's a decision which has been key to the show's DNA from the start. Right from the start, they were determined that they were not going to obey any of the rules that Tolkien made for his own universe. That this was going to be an entirely new universe, unrelated to anything of Tolkien, and they were just going to stamp his brand on it. That's why everything you see from the show doesn't actually look like Middle-earth, it just looks like generic fantasy number 12, please. That is because it is. Because they decided it was going to be that way from the very start. And Ada Robertson has the nerve to say that this would go against the very spirit of the source material itself. That Tolkien explores many themes, but one of them is the idea that people from all walks of life can come together and form a common cause. And that is a very nice message. However, it has nothing to do with a book universe. Just because someone might want people to come together and solve a problem doesn't mean that you could just break canon. Just because he wrote stories about people coming together to fight evil doesn't mean that if he writes a character and describes a character that you can just change it to whatever you want it to be because you wanted it. And if you are going to do that because you bought the rights to it, you can't then go, well, it's what he would have wanted. No, what he wanted is what he wrote down. That's why he wrote it down. If he wanted the aesthetics of the world to be different, then he would have written it that way. That's why people write things down in the first place. So don't come at me and tell me this is what Tolkien would have wanted, because we know what Tolkien would have wanted. It's what he wrote. But the strangest piece is next, because this is Ada Robinson talking. This is Muriel. And Muriel says, for me personally, I would have the expectation that the show would reflect the real world. And this is a quote. This is a quote we've seen before from the Rings of Power before. In the first Vanity Fair article for Rings of Power, where they say it felt only natural to us that an adaptation, notice they dropped adaptation, but it's what they were calling it originally, of Tolkien's work would reflect what the world actually looks like. Except this was from Lindsay Weber, who's an executive producer. For me personally, I would have the expectation that it would reflect the real world. It felt only natural to us that it would reflect what the real world looks like. This is two entirely different people saying exactly the same thing in almost exactly the same words. Maybe they had conversations backstage. Maybe she just picked up that certain phrase and thought, yeah, that was good. That was really good. I'm going to take that on board. We all do it when we're having a conversation with someone. You think, no, that's actually a good point. Yeah, I agree with that. And you start using the phrase later on in your own. It happens. It happens. The question is, how many times does it need to happen before it becomes suspicious and almost like people were giving talking points? Because in the original article, they also go, Tolkien is for everyone. His stories about people doing their best work when they leave the isolation of their own cultures and come together. Whereas Ada Robinson said it's the very spirit of the source material, that Tolkien explores many themes. One of them is people from different ethnicities and backgrounds coming together for a common cause. This entire quote from Ada Robinson is basically this quote from Lindsay Weber rephrased. Yeah, maybe all the people for Amazon that go out and do exclusive interviews just happen to agree on everything and use the same phrases. Or maybe it's a bit sus and, people are given talking points that they should give to the interviewer. But what does make me laugh is, despite the fact that they say Tolkien never wanted his stories to echo real-world politics, they've also written a story where people are pondering a more modern and independent future and increasingly becoming afraid of their own mortality. If that doesn't just sound like the peak of Californianism to you, then I don't really know what does. And it only gets worse when the actress for Muriel says, when it comes to a character that holds such a lofty position, I can't say that I necessarily relate to what it is to be a queen, but I think there is something relatable about how isolating that can feel and how you're grappling with things that no one else can really understand. All seems a bit odd to me, the idea that everyone can relate to the idea of feeling isolated because you're grappling with things no one else can understand. How arrogant are you that you think nobody else can possibly understand what you're going through? Firstly, there isn't that many things that can happen to you in your life. Odds are other people have gone through similar situations. And secondly, you don't actually need to go through what somebody else has gone through to relate to them about it. I've never been on a ship that sank. But if I met someone that had just survived the Titanic and watched everybody else drown, I could definitely empathize and relate to how horrible that experience must have been. So as much as I do like that you're now using the language of relatability rather than representation, I think you probably missed the mark on that one. The article, though, does admit that her character and others actually do loom large throughout Tolkien's work. Not that the showrunners actually care about that, considering the characters that they've made aren't the characters from Tolkien's work. I don't know, there just seems like a few slight differences to me. Because it's the same with anything. Once you start changing the fundamental and foundational elements of these characters, it's not that character anymore. It's not that person. All you've done is taken the name and stuck it onto something else. Yet again, the exact same problem that we suffered through with the Wheel of Time, where the characters weren't the people, just had the same names. But the actors of this piece, they see that as an advantage. Ultimately, those of us that know the lore know how he ends up, but how he gets there, Tolkien hasn't written the man in 3 dimensions, and that's the gift of this show. The gift of this show is that Tolkien wrote about it, but not totally. There might be some gaps for us to crowbar open so we can just fill it with our own stuff. And the bits that he has written about, we're just going to ignore anyway, so who really cares? These showrunners are people who wax lyrical about excavating details and common threads so they can tie everything together. But really, it's all just a big con. We're going to provide lip service that we're changing things, but even we realised we had to drop the adaptation tag because we're not actually adapting anything. We've changed it all. At the end of the day, this is just inspired by a name, and then everything else we just made up. When they're talking about stars in the sky, they basically mean that Tolkien's lore is just really far away, so far away, that they can't actually read it anymore. Yeah, I can't see what that smush said on page 33, so I'll just give it a go. The article does say that about half the cast and crew are actually British, and so it makes sense why they're following the old British work ethic of, that'll do. Should we do our best and make it perfect? Nah, that'll do. And the article seems to realise the contradiction we're about to go into when it starts with, still, we spent the rest of the article explaining how this isn't going to be Tolkien, but at the end of the day, the 2 writers hope audiences will still embrace the Second Age. Their goal was to appeal to both hardcore fans, which I think after looking at the trailers, we can safely say they've failed. This is your latest trailer with 4.6 million views in 2 days, and yeah, the ratio's not the best, is it? I think we can safely say that you may not have appealed to the hardcore fans, or indeed even the newbies who don't know what a ring is, considering they'll look at those trailers and just see the same thing they always see with any fantasy series. You've given them no reason to actually care about this piece more than any other. In fact, the only reason why they'd be more interested in this than, say, something like the Wheel of Time TV series is because you've got a bigger number as the budget, which could excite them, and because it's got a name that they're more likely to recognize. Although if they don't know what a ring is, you may not even have that. But then they say it needs to feel the way you feel when you're in Middle-earth. It needs to pull you in and make you fall in love the way you fall in love with those books. Except we've already determined that this isn't the books, that this isn't Tolkien, it's not his universe, and has nothing to do with it. You want to put in literally no effort to make things look and sound the same or feel the same, but then still preach that you want people to feel the same. If you wanted people to think this was the same universe, then you should have acted like it. You should have stuck to the canon, stuck to the books. You're the ones that decided not to. And we end with probably the strangest paragraph of the entire article. Amazon recently screened about 20 minutes of the show for a group of Tolkien superfans. This is an exclusive article that was written, and even they are calling them Tolkien superfans. I gotta say, I only referred to the London group as that because it was a meme from the first group, which Amazon called that in the first place. I didn't think it was really going to catch on, but now when Amazon's own exclusive articles are calling them superfans, yeah, I'm not sure that's the compliment that they think it is. But as Payne and McKay hid in the back, they overheard one audience member say that the show felt like Middle-earth, and in response, I was surprised. I spontaneously burst into tears. Now I can understand why a fan of Lord of the Rings would burst into tears when watching Rings of Power. The desecration of something you love is always hard to bear, but I would like to ask, just how realistic is it that someone spontaneously said, oh, this feels like Middle-earth? I watch a lot of game trailers, and game trailers often adapt to other people's work, and I can't imagine watching one and going, oh, this really feels like Terminator. Largely because that's what you expect. That's what it should do. That's the assumed opinion. You'll comment on it if you think it doesn't look like it, but if it does, that's not a positive. That's just what should be expected. That's the minimum assumed baseline. You don't actually even get points for doing it. You only get points taken away if you don't do it. It's very odd that anyone would come out and go, oh, that feels like Middle-earth. Just spontaneously, in the middle of the video, to themselves. But maybe Gandalf was right. Not all tears are evil. And honestly, all of that was a really strange article to me. It's an exclusive piece with exclusive images that came just before the trailer was released. This was the warm-up for the trailer to release the next day. And yet, it really wasn't very complimentary. Is this what they think is complimentary? Is this what they think is good? It's a strange mix where it's definitely tried to shift the tone from the adaptation, which we've had in many of the marketing before, to no, it's not an adaptation. It's definitely just inspired by. While at the same time still having the arrogant thing of, no, we know what Tolkien really means. Ignore what he wrote. We know his true heart. Trust us. I saw this release before the trailer, but I didn't read it before the trailer. I only read it afterwards. And I can't say if I'd read this before the trailer, it would have made me hyped for it at all. If anything, it seems to do the opposite. So all in all, ew seems to be the correct response for it. It seems to be the attitude they took with Rings of Power in the first place. These are the pieces that Amazon would have the most control over to work with to present their best case. And yet this was apparently their best case. This. A very Wheel of Time picture with a queen who, for some reason, still has scale mail on. Yes, renowned for going out and engaging in martial combat were the queens of history. And with all that, with all the mixed messaging, I have to ask what they thought they were going to achieve. Did they think this was good? Did they think this was going to make people want to watch the show? Because at the end of the day, it seems more like a sick burn than anything else. But if I took one thing from this article, I think it's going to be this. I don't think the Rings of Power is going to be good. But I do think it's going to be entertaining, purely because it's going to be so fun to take the piss out of. It's something I found with the Wheel of Time. Once you accept that this actually isn't Wheel of Time and you can separate the show from the actual IP itself, something strange happens. You find that actually this show is just so awful, it's incredibly funny. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe, more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.